Good morning, good morning. Thank you so much for joining me. This is the podcast, The Endurance of Labor Laws. I am your lovely host, Lesley Sullivan. And today is episode 139, and we are going to take a look at the Superfund sites located in the state of Nevada. But first of all, let me give a big shout out to my listeners. So a big shout out to Oklahoma, Texas, New York, Virginia, Oregon, Pennsylvania, Washington, North Carolina, Minnesota, and Nevada. In terms of countries, the United States, the United Kingdom, and the Russian Federation. Okay, so in regards to Nevada and their Superfund sites, it was very interesting what I discovered about this. So it's almost like Nevada doesn't want people to know what all is going on there. Because initially when I looked up the Superfund sites of Nevada, it was like, well, we have these sites here, but we're not putting them on the national priorities list. It's kind of like, well, but you're putting them on a list. Then there was kind of some confusion about how to describe these. So Nevada does have Superfund sites, but they also have what are called, I think they're called brownfield sites. I had never heard of that. So we're going to talk about the Superfund sites in the state of Nevada, which they have 3 of them. Then we're going to go over a report that talks about how Nevada has more than 200 brownfield sites. And a brownfield site, from what it says, is where there's hazardous pollution that supposedly prevents economic development and threatens public health and safety. So I'm not really sure if these brownfield sites are 100% real because they're not listed as Superfund sites. So what I've noticed is that if there are people that want federal tax dollars, they will make up these programs and then suck our tax dollars dry just to get money from it. That's not to say that Nevada does not have an issue, that there are not problems, but in regards to the EPA and these environmental groups that expect to get all these federal tax dollars and these federal grants, we're talking millions of dollars going to Nevada alone, but yet they're not getting stuff cleaned up, and then they have some kind of social justice issue, like environmental justice, which is total BS, excuse my language. It's total bull. Like, if you don't like where you live, you need to move. It doesn't matter what race you are, what religion you are, how old you are, or how young you are, or whether you're male, female, or a child. It just doesn't matter. It's so annoying when they claim to have environmental justice issues or injustice. I'm like, look, if you don't like the quality of the air where you live, then why don't you help out your community? Like, stop looking to the government for money. You know, if you really care about your state and your community, then you will go out there and help get the work done. And then also the states are responsible for their cleanup. That's the thing. The Superfund program, it was created to identify really bad Superfund sites, and it was created so that the federal government could help out states that needed help. Now, the EPA has become a crutch and a kind of a personal piggy bank to the states. The states are responsible for their own issues, their own problems. And what I find interesting is that states, they will claim states' rights on some things, but then when they want millions of dollars, millions of tax dollars from federal grants, you know, they'll throw up their arms in the air and whine about it. It's like, okay, well, is that your states' rights complaint? I mean, are you going to act like a spoiled, rotten little kid on aisle 7 in Toys R Us? You know, grow up. So I think one of the problems is that, sadly and unfortunately, Nevada, I'm not impressed with Nevada. I don't think they're doing a good job on their own. And they have Las Vegas. I mean, they have, you know, they do not have a shortage of money. But yet they're getting millions of dollars from federal tax grants. And I have a problem with that because they're just using the taxpayer so that they don't have to handle their issues. So I'm very disappointed in that, but let's talk about their Superfund sites first. So the first one is Carson River Mercury Site. So this one's bad because you're dealing with mercury. It is located in the county of Lyon or Leon. I'm not sure how you pronounce that. It's actually located in 3 different counties. So Leon County has 59,235 people living in that area. The next county is Story County, and they have 4,010 people living in that area. And the next county is Churchill County, and they have 24,877 people living in that area. The issue at this Superfund site is surface water, sediment, soil, fish, and wildlife contamination by mercury from historical gold and silver mining operations. This one was added to the list August 30th, 1990. The next one is Anaconda Mine. It is located in the county of Leon. The issue with this one is groundwater and surface water contamination by a wide range of heavy metals, radioisotopes, chlorides, sulfates, and acidic conditions. And it says fugitive dust from contaminated mine tailings is also a threat. I've never heard of fugitive dust, like is it on the run? Makes it sound like a person. It doesn't tell me when this one was added to the list, but it is an issue because it has not been cleaned up. The next one is Rio Tinto Copper Mine. It is located in the county of Elko. Elko County has, its population as of 2010 was 48,818 people living in that area. The issue with this one is copper, iron, and manganese and zinc have contaminated the area. Doesn't tell me if it's surface water, groundwater, the soil, the air. Doesn't tell me any of that. It just tells me what specifically the elements are that are causing a problem. And again, it does not tell me when this was discovered or when it was added to the national priorities list. So it's kind of vague, which is really odd. When I looked up the state of Nevada on the EPA website, it just listed off maybe 2 Superfund sites, but it wasn't real specific. It was very vague. So I did a little more research, and I found an article from the Environmental Defense Fund, and it says Finding the Ways That Work. And the title of this article is Trump's Assault on the EPA, and it doesn't give me a date of when this was published, which I think is really stupid. And it doesn't tell me, who specifically this is written by, like what person, like if there's a chair or if there's a committee. It's just from the Environmental Defense Fund. And so I need to look up exactly what is the EDF, which is their abbreviation, because it sounds like they're just getting a lot of money for not doing any work. Like they're worse than the EPA. And plus, they obviously are extremely environmental because they can't stand Trump. So I'm guessing they wrote this when he was in office because it says Trump's assault on the EPA. So the title of it is State of Risk, Nevada Report Summary. So to me, this is a reflection of how stupid Nevada is. No offense, Nevada, but your state is not very bright if it has so many issues with environmental problems, but yet your state is not using its own tax dollars to take care of this stuff. Like you are constantly trying to rely on and successfully relying on the EPA for millions of dollars, almost $100 million, and yet your state still has a huge issue, even though you have Las Vegas, you have other cities and towns and counties that are very successful and very prosperous. So that tells me that as a state, you don't know how to spend money. In fact, you are mismanaging your money. And so because of your mismanagement, you're crying wolf to the federal government. And because these stupid, environmental groups that are very liberal, they love to spend other people's money. So I guess they're just like you. They're stupid and they like to spend other people's money. All the more reason to cut a lot of this funding. I'm for it. Because I think sometimes people need to grow up. So here is the report from the EDF, and this is from edf.org. It says, over the last 5 years, and again, it doesn't tell me when this was written. So I don't know when this was published. I don't know when it was written. Again, I'm pretty sure it was when Trump was in office. So it says, over the last 5 years, Nevada has received more than $83 million in grants from the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency, also known as the EPA, which is a federal agency. So that $83 million, actually more than $83 million, is our money. It's our tax dollars going towards a state that is not doing well. And they choose to not do well. They are mismanaging their money, and they don't know what they're doing. So they shouldn't get any federal grant money until they figure out what's going on. So it says, Nevada has received more than $83 million in grants from the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency, also known as the EPA, to protect the state's environment and economy. Here's the thing. It is on the state 100% to protect their own environment and their economy. The federal government is not responsible for the state's environment or its economy. It can help, but the majority of the responsibility is on the state. I don't care if it's Nevada, Pennsylvania, Oklahoma, New York, California, Texas, whatever state it is, or even territory. They are responsible for themselves because we are the United States. We're not just America, one big blob of land, and we don't have any states, we don't have any towns, we don't have any cities, we don't have any, city councils, we don't have any representatives. See, here's the thing. Whenever states like this, like Nevada, are taking over $83 million from the federal government, they basically are saying, oh, well, we don't really care to be responsible for our state or our people, so just give us the money. That's what they're doing. Hence, it's an issue. President Trump's proposed budget would cut the EPA funding by more than 30%, putting Nevada at grave risk. Really, Nevada put itself at grave risk. That is not the responsibility of President Trump. It is not the responsibility of the American people. States' rights dictate that a state is responsible for themselves, and if they cannot be responsible for themselves, then maybe they should roll back their statehood. Maybe they should go back to being a territory and have, the army live there and be in charge of their property. Just be like a reservation or something. But not be like an Indian reservation. Like if they don't want to be responsible, then just admit it and roll back your state's rights. Roll back your state constitution if you don't know how to do your job and do it well. Here's the thing, I guarantee you they will never want to give up states' rights. If anything, they will probably be offended when they hear this podcast. And let me just say up front, I don't care. Because when you're spending this kind of money and you're not taking ownership of your state, you're not taking ownership of the environment and the people that you have been given basically to provide for. And I don't mean provide for in a socialist manner. I mean that within states' rights, I'm trying to find a way to describe this properly. Within states' rights, every state is responsible for the people that live in that state, like the people that take residence there. And I don't mean that from a socialist point of view, not by any means. I'm talking about with tax dollars, property rights, voting rights, things like that. Because, for example, whenever you own property and you pay property tax, that property tax is usually paid via the county, if not the city or the state. So, for example, if I own property in Oklahoma, I'm not going to pay property tax to California. Why? Because our states are not connected. Why? Because we are separate states. We are separate entities. However, Nevada seems to think that it just doesn't have to grow up. It doesn't have to take its thumb out of its mouth. It doesn't have to stop sucking on it. That's the problem with some of these states. And I'm very disappointed to see Nevada act like this. I'm very disappointed because I never thought Nevada would have such an issue of overspending and not giving a rat's posterior about its people or the land. They just want the federal government to help them out with anything and everything. Well, grow up. Really, grow up. I mean, it's just unbelievable. They're just a bunch of whiners. I'm just like, wow, this really says a lot about their state, right? They overspend their own tax dollars from a state level. They get almost $100 million from the federal government. They overspend on that, and they don't even take care of their environment. They don't take care of the soil, the land, the surface water, the water table. They don't take care of the air, but yet they have places like Las Vegas where there's child prostitution, and then they actually do have legalized prostitution in their state. So obviously they don't really value human life. So just FYI, be aware of that. So I guess it shouldn't surprise me that they have a problem with morals and ethics when they have legalized prostitution. Like, here's the thing. Whenever you legalize a very evil act, I'm not surprised when there are other forms of evil behavior that take place because it leads to lack of ethics and morals. So I'm not surprised by that. If anything, Nevada is acting like I don't want to say a pimp, per se, but they definitely expect the federal government to be like their little hoe, or whatever, excuse my language, and give them money. So maybe Nevada should stop legalizing prostitution And why don't they focus on human rights? Focus on human dignity. Because I would believe more in the state of Nevada if they did that. So that's my beef with that. Goes on to say when talking about water, it says dozens of Nevada projects have relied on EPA grant money, meaning they're not responsible for themselves, meaning they keep sucking on their thumb. This is why they keep relying on the EPA for grant money. It's because they overspend on their tax dollars from their state. And property is not cheap in Nevada. So where is all these tax dollars going that people are paying for property, sales tax, any kind of tax? Where is Nevada spending that money? If they are having to heavily rely on the EPA, what is going on with spending in their state? I bet you they have not had an audit in a long time. It sounds like they need one. So it says dozens of Nevada projects have relied on EPA grant money to combat non-point source pollution, whatever that means. The number one source of water pollution in the United States today, I kind of think that's BS. It says the Trump administration would eliminate the non-point source pollution grant. Good. That's a program which helps control pollutants carried by rainfall runoff into the state's drinking water, rivers, and lakes. Nevada, get this, Nevada has relied on $7.8 million in these grants over the last 5 years. If Nevada can't handle the environment, maybe they should take a continued education class and figure out how to handle it as a state so that way they will not have to rely on the federal government for almost $8 million for this program that sounds really stupid. They should be relying on the private sector. Why aren't they hiring companies that maybe they've already discovered a way of how to handle this? See, this is the stupidity of bureaucracies, whether state or federal. Instead of finding talented people in the private sector that can actually help alleviate these issues immediately, they instead look at the tax dollars and taxpayers as their personal piggy bank. So they bring up an issue that everybody will agree on is bad: pollution, water pollution. Let's have clean drinking water, things like that. Like everybody can agree on that. So they use something that pokes a button or really gets people riled up across the board, because we all want clean drinking water. We all want safe places to live. That's true, but that doesn't mean that you overspend on your budgets. That doesn't mean that you have permission to go crying like a little 5-year-old to the federal government and say, gimme, 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 while sucking on your thumb or your pappy. Or your blankie, or whatever you suck on, Nevada. It's ridiculous. This is almost $8 million in tax dollars, from federal tax dollars, that Nevada is spending, and that they are not coughing up their own money, basically. So this tells me Nevada is not running their state very well, because states are individual states. The United States is not one big blob of a state. Like, we're not all Texas. We're not all California. We're not all Oklahoma. You know what I mean? Like, every state has financial responsibilities. And if it is having an issue with their finances, they need to do an internal audit and an external audit, and they need to figure out what is causing this issue and hire the right people to correct it. But they're not doing that. Why am I not surprised? The next section is about soil. It says here, the Carson River Mercury site is one of the most significant ongoing Superfund sites in the country due to millions of pounds of highly toxic mercury from mining operations dating back to the 1800s. The Trump administration proposes a 30% cut to the Superfund program, which supports the cleanup of toxic and radioactive sites. Here's the thing. They keep saying the Trump administration proposes this cut. Here's the thing. It's a 30% cut. How do you describe this? It's a 30% cut from the EPA, not from each individual program per se. So, the Trump administration, they were one of the few people or administrations that were actually calling the EPA out on their overspending. Because in a previous podcast, we talked about who the Environmental Protection Agency is, how many employees they have, which is not a whole lot per se, but yet their budget is almost $10 billion a year. That's billion with a B. Now, let me put it this way. Let's say if Elon Musk was in charge of the EPA. Do you really think that he would allow or tolerate $10 billion to be spent every year and that budget to increase every year, but not much is getting cleaned up? The environment is just getting worse? No, he would not. Why? Because he comes from the private sector. He's a little nutty right now. I think he's had a stroke or something. My personal opinion, because he's having sex with all these women, getting them pregnant just so he can have as many kids as possible, which is really creepy. It's like, okay, that's very skanky behavior. But, as a business owner, he's a little more ethical, and he understands that, hey, results matter. You can't be spending $10 billion a year but not be getting your work done. It just doesn't make sense. But see, here's the thing. That's the difference between, how someone in the private sector thinks, like someone that actually had to build their own company from scratch, as opposed to the federal government and these federal agencies that they just have an endless pool of money, which is our money. It's our treasury. It's our currency. It doesn't belong to the government. It belongs to the people. The people of the United States, which means you have to be a citizen of the United States in order for that to qualify. So for those that are here illegally, what we're talking about does not apply to you because you don't have voting rights. You technically don't have workers' rights. You have rights as a visitor, but that's about it. So just FYI, be aware of that. Goes on to say Nevada has more than 200 brownfield sites where hazardous pollution prevents economic development and threatens public health and safety. Again, it says the Trump administration proposes a 30% cut to the Brownfields grant program. Again, it's not just to that program, it's to the EPA. So this is a very shady group, and it is the Environmental Defense Fund, and they are located in Washington, D.C. Why am I not surprised? Obviously, the swamp was not completely drained, and I know that Trump, he very much tried to drain the swamp there. He really tried, but there's only so much you can do with bureaucracies that go back several decades. So I looked up brownfield sites, and so it took me to the nnda.org website, and so it says about the Environmental Protection Agency Brownfields Program. So a little bit of background information because I did not know any of this, and I can see why there's so much wasteful spending. It's because of agencies or programs like this. They toot their horn like they're doing something, but they're really not. They're just wasting millions of tax dollars, which is our money, not their money. Okay, so the Brownfields program was established in 1995. It focused on the redevelopment and revitalization of underutilized and vacant properties whose safety is questionable. So that means that they don't actually know if there's a problem. It's just questionable. That's the issue. So they're just crying wolf, but yet they have no proof because they don't have any facts. It's just questionable, okay? It says results-oriented program that has changed the way contaminated or perceived contaminated properties addressed and managed. So here's the thing, perceived. Perceived does not mean that it's true. So this is very shady. It's like a lawyer wrote this, okay? Then it says it empowers states, communities, and other stakeholders in economic development to work together to prevent, assess, safely clean up, and sustainably reuse brownfields. And then brownfield characteristics, like basically what is a brownfield? It says per the EPA, a brownfield is real property, it probably should have said real estate, but it says real property whose expansion, redevelopment, or reuse may be complicated by the presence or perceived presence, see that's a lie, they're lying, or perceived presence of a hazardous substance, pollutant, or contaminant. Maybe these people should stop lying and start telling the truth. Perceived does not mean that it's real and it's factual. You either really do have the presence of something or you don't. You can't just perceive it and call it factual. But yet these people are getting millions of dollars in grant money and donations just because of their perceivedness of what they think is there when it's not. Like to me that's lying because it is. Like if a piece of property is dangerous and hazardous, you don't have to lie about it. It's just evident. It's there. Like, do your test. But these people, in order to be successful, they have to lie about it. Well, we perceive a presence of blah, blah, blah. Well, when you actually know that there's a presence of something hazardous, then we'll talk about it. But until then, you can perceive all you want, but it doesn't mean diddly squat. Because it's not factual. So if something's not factual, then you're lying about it. So why don't you be of good moral character and stop lying? Because it's not good to be deceitful. And that's not a good example, to children, much less to people that you're supposed to be a mentor to. So don't be deceitful, because you're training people to lie, and that's not right. So brownfield also, it says it's often an abandoned, idled, whatever that means, or underused industrial or commercial facility that may have left contaminants behind. See, this is very vague. I'm telling you, a lawyer probably wrote this, or some kind of social justice idiot. May have left contaminants behind. Either contaminants were left behind or they weren't. You can't just say, oh, they may have been left behind. That's pretty vague, and vague is stupid. You either know the facts or you don't. If you don't know the facts, don't act like you do, because you're wasting my brain space and other people's time. It's ridiculous. So some examples of brownfield characteristics are railroads, gas stations, oil refineries, dry cleaners, liquid or chemical storage facilities, heavy manufacturing plants, and sites where pollutants were dumped. You know what's interesting is that every single one of those examples is not a perceived example. Like, they're definitive. So I find it very interesting that they give themselves to just make stuff up. But yet, when they really want to try and swing it home, then they start using actual factual data that, yes, these are good examples of possible toxic hazardous waste. We've seen that, but here's the thing. If you know that something is toxic and hazardous, you don't have to lie about it. Be honest, like, be truthful in NDA.org or Brownfield's program. Be honest, be legit, don't lie. So then it says, impact of cleared brownfields. It doesn't tell me how many have been cleaned up, so who knows? They probably just took the money and ran with it. So it says they protect the health of local residents, protects the environment, can increase residential property values by 5 to 15.2% near the brownfield. I kind of find that hard to believe because they're not in charge of real estate, although I'm sure they love tax dollars, but I find that very hard to believe. And what's interesting, I wonder if the brownfield program was part of the issue where some of these Superfund sites, they were supposedly cleaned up and they supposedly revitalized them, got them cleaned up, and then they let people move back onto them, like built houses and businesses, and then people got sick. Some developed cancer. Some of them got really ill because I don't think everybody knew that lived on those sites that used to be a Superfund site. And, it's one of those things, they need to be told. But also, I just wonder, are these sites really cleaned up like what they think they are? Because if they're already being dishonest about their program, then what makes you think they're going to be honest about whether or not the land has been properly cleaned up and that there's nothing toxic or hazardous there? Are they just perceiving that it's okay to live there? I mean, it's ridiculous. Are they just perceiving that it's safe? Are they just perceiving that everything is cleaned up, or is it actually safe? Did they run tests? Did they take soil samples? Did they take water samples? Has it been cleared by the EPA? Has it been cleared by not only the EPA, but also a private sector company that maybe does this kind of testing for a living and is not associated with the federal bureaucracy? Like, is it proven? See, we have discussed a couple different, or actually several different Superfund sites in the past where the EPA let people move back in onto the land and they got sick. They were exposed to toxic, hazardous chemicals or waste or water or whatever the case may be. I mean, whose stupidity is that? It's not the homeowner's fault. It's not the business owner's fault. I have no doubt they're told that this is a safe place to live, and I don't even know if they're told that it used to be a Superfund site, but my point is this. These people make it seem like everything that they do is on the up and up, when it's not. It's not even on the up and up, even with the EPA and Superfund sites and the Superfund program, because they have made quite a few mistakes over the years. Now again, mistakes can happen and will happen, but what sucks is when these mistakes keep happening and they don't take ownership of it. And they're not doing a good job. And plus, common sense would tell you, if this area used to be toxic and hazardous, we probably should not have people live on it until we know for sure that there is not an ounce of hazardous waste material here, like not a shred of it. And that it has been restored and cleaned up, and that it is safe for people, plants, animals, everything, that it is environmentally safe. The EPA can't even get it right. So what makes you think that NNDA.org is going to get it right? What makes you think this Brownfields program is going to get it right? Like it's so haphazard. It's so ridiculous. I mean, it's just kind of shocking in a way, because you would think that they would have set protocols and set standards. Well, when you have set protocols and set standards, then you don't just perceive something. You either know it or you don't. You either prove it or you haven't proven it. Like, you just say it like it is. So why would I trust anything that these people do? I mean, it's ridiculous. Like, people do not deserve to be exposed to toxic, hazardous waste. I don't care in what state. I don't care who it is. I don't care what their race is, their sex, their creed, whatever. I don't care. No one deserves to be exposed to this stuff. But yet you get federal bureaucracies involved, and you get some of these bad .org people that basically just set up foundations to get tax dollars, federal tax dollars. I mean, it's just a money pit. And it's wrong. I mean, it's one thing if someone is using their own money to have a foundation and to do good work. That's amazing, because that's what foundations and boards used to do. But now, there are so many foundations and stuff like this that they expect to get money from the federal government. I'd be like, we're pulling the plug on that. If you can't afford to do your dream job, maybe you should rethink about what your dream job actually is. And if you can't afford it, what makes you think the American people, can't afford it? It's our money, not yours. So, wake up, all you little .org foundations. Some of you really need a wake-up call, because some of you act like a spoiled, rotten little kid in aisle 7 at a Toys R Us, and it's getting really old. Like, just grow up, be responsible, spend your own money, not somebody else's. That's my personal request. It goes on to talk about potential economic benefits of these brownfield programs. It says increased tax base, creation of new jobs, utilization, repurposing of existing infrastructure, and removal of blight. Here's the thing, repurposing of existing infrastructure. If something is contaminated, you cannot repurpose it. Duh. Like, all you're doing is moving the contamination from one site to another. I mean, are you perceiving that? I mean, are you aware of that? I mean, you know what it reminds me of? It reminds me, I'm trying to think of when this happened, but there was a hospital around the turn of the century, I think it was in a maternity ward, that they weren't cleaning the blankets or the sheets or something like they were supposed to. I can't remember exactly what this was. But something wasn't being done appropriately, and so there were several diseases that were being passed from ward to ward, and they were wondering why, this one ward, even though the patients were not moving from room to room, the sheets and the nurses and the doctors, they were moving from room to room, and so they're trying to figure out how are these diseases spreading, basically. Because they just thought, the disease stays with the patient. That was a very dumb way of thinking, but this is also pre-germ theory or around germ theory, which is dumb because, the human race has known about germs since the beginning of time. Like, even in biblical times, they knew about germs. Just because they didn't have a microscope, that doesn't mean that they didn't know, hey, someone's sick, we need to quarantine them and make sure that, they are healthy before they come out of their, place of residence or whatever. So that way they don't get other people sick. Like, disease is nothing new. But what's interesting is that, they were trying to repurpose or refurbish things in this hospital or whatever, and all it did was spread disease. Congratulations on recycling. It killed quite a few people. So, I guess pat yourself on the back for that one. So the next segment says EPA Brownfields Coalition Assessment Cooperative Agreements with NNDA. So, it says program funding is used to inventory, categorize, assess, and conduct planning and community involvement related to brownfield sites. Basically, it's going to cost us a lot of money is what it means. Because here's the thing, whenever you get more people involved, that means there's more hands in the pot. So if it was me, I wouldn't have all these coalitions. I'd be like, there are certain people that need to be in charge of certain things, and I think sometimes if you get too many people on your board, you're just overspending money, which is what happens here. So it talks about these three-year grants awarded to NNDA at $600,000, and it lists like these 3 different sites. Churchill County and Leon County, I guess that was completed supposedly in 2014. Carson City and Douglas County, 2017, I guess still in progress. Churchill County and Leon County, 2018, still in progress. The expected results, a total investment of nearly $1.8 million directly invested into Sierra region properties between 2014 and 2021. Then another expected result is expansion of industrial space to support the growth of the region's economic ecosystem, whatever that means. Let's see here. For brownfields which have successfully completed the assessment process, the EPA has granted NNDA permission to use some of the grant funds to cover the cost of getting eligible sites certified through its Sierra Region Certified Sites program. This will help to quickly build an inventory of needed and qualified industrial space. So then they list off some of their success stories. It's just kind of ridiculous. But anyway, because what's interesting is that if you have to rely on the federal government, for all these little things that you want, maybe you're not really being responsible with your life and your life decisions. Because if you're constantly having to look to somebody else for money, maybe that's a big hint that you don't know what you're doing. Maybe you need to learn to raise your own funds and not look to other people to pay your paycheck like that. It's kind of interesting, but again, this is how some of these agencies operate, and it's kind of disappointing. I say kind of, it is disappointing. But anyway, that's what brownfield sites are, and Nevada has more than 200 of them. But again, it's perceived hazardous sites. So just because Nevada, it says they have more than 200 brownfield sites, that doesn't mean that it's actually hazardous because, again, perceived is a pretty vague word. You know what I mean? It's just totally dumb. It sounds like something a stupid sorority house would say. Well, I perceived that she was mad at me. Well, was she or wasn't she? I don't know. I just perceived it. I just got a vibe. Well, did you verify that vibe? No. Why am I not surprised? Just stupid stuff like that. So it says Nevada has a backlog of more than 150 leaking underground storage tanks in need of cleanup. These tanks are at risk of leaking harmful chemicals which would foul drinking water and soil, jeopardize community health, and cripple economic development. Well, Nevada, clean it up. Use your tax dollars. Be responsible with the monies that you get from your citizens. Just be responsible. It says 2 EPA programs fund efforts to prevent and detect leaks as well as clean up damaged soil and groundwater. That's the responsibility of the state. That is not the responsibility of the EPA. And again, it says the Trump budget plan eliminates one of the programs and cuts the other in half. Good. Because I guarantee you, Trump probably looked at all this and said, hey, the state of Nevada is just feeding at the trough. They're not being fiscally responsible with their tax dollars from their state. Why am I not surprised? Next, it talks about the air pollution. It says 92% of Nevadans live in counties receiving an F on an air quality measure from the American Lung Association. Now, mind you, the American Lung Association is one of these foundations where it's basically like, I don't know how to describe it. To me, I guess we need to do a podcast on these associations. A lot of these associations were founded for good reasons, but a lot of them these days, they're just a money pit. They just want money so they can spend it and so they can have a board, get paid a lot of money, but they don't really do anything outside of that. Yes, they have stickers and posters and commercials, but Have they found a cure for lung cancer? No. Have they found a cure for asthma? No. Have they found a cure for pleurisy? No. Well, they didn't find a cure for pneumonia. Someone invented a vaccine. But have they found a cure for the viral pneumonia? No, not unless there's a vaccine for it, which I'm pretty sure the vaccines are for the bacterial form of pneumonia. See, here's the thing. They don't really do anything. They just get a bunch of money. So why should we listen to them when they don't do very much? You know what I mean? It's just ridiculous. And plus, I've known people over the years that have lung issues. The American Lung Association has never offered to pay for their medicine that they need for what's it called, emphysema or COPD. And I've known some people that have died from that. Did the American Lung Association help with their burial costs? No. Did they help with their hospice care? No. Did they help with their medications for life-saving medications? No, they did not. So what does the American Lung Association do? I'm not really sure, but I will definitely look it up and we'll probably do a podcast about them. It says Nevada's 2 most populous regions ranked among the top 10 worst in the nation in the same report, which is Las Vegas. Henderson was ranked 10th most polluted for ozone. And then Reno, Carson City, Fernley ranked 10th worst for short-term particle pollution. More than 39,000 children and more than 179,000 adults in Nevada have asthma. Okay, then move. Move. If it's not where you should live, don't live there. That's the smart thing to do. Move. Among Nevada's biggest sources of EPA funding are Air Pollution Control Program grants, which went to local agencies in Clark and Washoe counties to support local clean air efforts in metropolitan areas where air quality problems can be the most severe. That's the responsibility of that city and that state. It's not the job of the EPA or the federal government. Again, it says the Trump administration's proposed budget would cut nearly 1/3 from programs that help state, local, and tribal communities monitor air quality. That's because it is the responsibility of the state and the local government. And if the tribes care, then they can monitor it themselves. They make a lot of money at their casinos, but as usual, or as we've talked about in times past, most Indian tribes have a lot of fraud in their tribes. It's really bad, so they're not run very well. Hence, their health care really sucks. This next section is very interesting. It says environmental justice. And again, I think it's stupid. The EPA's Office of Environmental Justice works to ensure everyone gets equal protection from environmental and health hazards. The Environmental Justice Small Grants Program, for instance, has made large impacts with low dollar amounts, providing more than $24 million in funding to more than 1,400 projects nationwide since 1994. Now here's the thing. They're spending $24 million, but only on 1,400 projects. That is a waste of money. They're not using their money very well. I find that kind of ridiculous. And they're doing this in the name of, quote, environmental justice. It says the Trump administration is proposing to shut down this modest program. Oh, you call $24 million modest? You gotta be kidding me. It says one of the biggest impacts of this cut would affect, here we go, Nevada's minority populations. Here's the thing. If something impacts minorities, it affects everybody. So stop crying wolf, stop playing your violin. We all have a violin. It's just that the whiners and complainers tend to play their violin a whole lot louder, and it's getting really old. It says 156 million people, including 62% of all minorities in the United States, live within 3 miles of a Superfund, brownfield, or solid and hazardous waste corrective action site. Designation that requires facilities to clean up hazardous spills. Here's the thing. This is bull. Okay, if you have 62% of all minorities in the United States live within 3 miles of a Superfund site, then that pretty much means almost 100% of the United States lives within a Superfund site. Because the entire United States is affected by Superfund sites. It's not just minorities. And if you don't like where you live, be smart, use your brain, stop whining, stop complaining, and just pick up and move. Go to a nicer area. Figure it out. The proposal would also cut 100% of the funding for environmental justice work, I agree with this, under the Superfund cleanup program, along with a 37% cut in funding to notify communities everywhere about what chemicals are being stored and used at industrial locations. Here's the thing. Some of the notifications come from the EPA, and some come from the state, and some come from your local community. A lot of this notification is supposed to be coming from your state programs. Here's the thing. I'm 38 years old. I live in Oklahoma. We do have some Superfund sites here. I have never received notification from the state of Oklahoma. I have never received notification from the EPA. I have never received notification from like a local action group or something. Nothing. But yet they claim this is for environmental justice. Give me a break. If they really cared, then wouldn't they just mail everybody something and let them know? I mean, it's just kind of ridiculous. It's kind of like just passing a hockey puck, but yet they want the money. But I will go ahead and end this podcast because the next part of this, it just lists like how much millions of dollars is being spent for every program within this. And I can see why Trump wanted to cut a lot of this stuff because it's not really doing any good. They're just overspending. So, but anyway, I will go ahead and end this podcast. But as usual, until next time, I pray that you're happy, healthy, and whole, that you have a wonderful day and a wonderful week. Thank you so much. Bye-bye.